Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar, brought to you by TechStrong. My name is Cody J. Brown, and I will be moderating today's session. We have an exciting presentation ahead of us, but before we begin, I have just a few housekeeping notes. Today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the discussion, it will be made available to rewatch. You'll receive an email after the webinar concludes with a link to access the on-demand. We want to hear from you, so please feel free to send in your questions at any time throughout the program by using the Q&A feature. We'll try to address as many questions as you send in, so make sure to get them in early. We also encourage discussion by using the chat tab, so let us know your thoughts or just say a quick hello from where you're from. Finally, at the end of today's webinar, we have a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. Stick around to see if you are one of our 4 lucky winners today. Let's go ahead and kick off our webinar. The topic, how we migrated from homegrown feature flags to Harness. And I'm joined today by Ethan Jones, Director of Product Management at Harness, Rushabh Shah, Principal Software Engineer at Harness, and Ilan Krayn, Senior Director of Customer Success Engineering at Harness. At this point in time, it's my pleasure to turn the program over to our panel. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks, Cody. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, for taking time out of your day or evening, depending on where you're based, to tune in. We will have questions at the end, so if you have any input, anything you want to ask, please drop it in the chat along the way, and we will circle back to discuss it with you. To get started here, as Cody said, I work on the product management team here at Harness, focused on feature flags. Rushabh is a principal engineer who kind of helped us lead the engineering effort around feature flags, and Ilan runs our support team. One of the reasons that is the panel is because with feature flags in particular, that is a fairly diverse spectrum of stakeholders impacted by the tool. You have support folks, you have engineers, and you have PMs, so we wanted to represent all those voices. Now, to kind of get started in the story of what we're talking about, right? We're talking about migrating to Harness feature flags. Before we get to migrating to it, we have to go back in time a little bit to where Harness started in its feature flag journey. And we started off like a lot of companies started off. We built a tool ourselves, an internal tool, a back-end only tool. A lot of companies, when they first start out with feature flagging, sort of encounter a feature flag problem, and they roll an admin tool, an app config tool, an app toggle tool, something that they use entirely internally and run themselves. And this really worked well for us for a while. It solved the problem, and then we started expanding on the tool over time as we encountered new problems. The problem is it was too successful. We started relying on it. We started using it heavily. And as that happened, we started finding some problems. For instance, we want to add this new feature to it. Who should do that? Whose feature team is going to take the hit to add the new feature to the tool? Who actually owns it? How do we audit it? How do we enforce RBAC? How do we make it easier to use so less technical members of the team, like PMs like myself, can get in there and use the feature flag tool? All of these things were starting to become problems operationally, and we had to decide, are we really going to invest engineering time in making our internal tool better, knowing there are tools out there? So I want to ask Ilan and Rushabh, maybe y'all could jump in here and talk a little bit about what your experience was using the old tool and kind of how you were thinking it was working for you.
Yeah, so from a developer perspective, I think we loved the old tool. And the reason is the simplicity of use, right? If I had to add a new feature flag, all I had to do was add an enum to a class, and that's it. The code would just be propagated to our data store, and the feature flag would be available to whoever would want to use it. So then it would just be propagated to the different environments, and all the users of feature flags could start to use it. So it was pretty simple to develop and use, and so I was actually, as developers, were very happy using the whole old homegrown solution.
I will be the naysayer here for a minute. And the old feature flag solution was developed by developer and somewhat for developers. The rest of us non-developers were having a harder time with it. For example, we always had a hard time understanding what is the function that the feature flag has. Who owns it? What does it actually do? There's no information about it. All we have is a name of a feature flag. So that kind of made it hard for us to know what to use and not to use. as Ethan kind of touched on it, when you use a homegrown tool and you need to change it or update it, no PM in their right mind would prioritize homegrown tools instead of customer features. So we were always, sorry, no offense, Ethan. We were always the last one on the list to get our wishes done, which obviously slowed us down and caused some unhappy customers when they were not getting what we need. And we always had a problem when feature flags got deprecated and moved out of the product. We didn't really have a good way of a handle. Oh, this feature flag is no longer available. Don't use it. There was nothing in the tool that told us these things. So that was something really annoying.
Yep, and I think that accurately reflects the conversation we had internally, what you kind of just heard there. And our decision at the end of the day was we really want feature flagging. We want to get even better at it as a company, but we don't necessarily want to keep investing in it. And we know there are tools out there. So we went out to the market, which is what a lot of companies do at this spot of the journey. And we tried to find a tool out there, and we evaluated everyone. And I want to be clear, there's some really great tools out there. This isn't about the tools weren't necessarily good at what they were doing. But what we found is the tools didn't do exactly what we wanted them to do and what we thought a feature flag tool should be doing in the modern time. So we're a software delivery company, right? We build CI/CD here at Harness. It felt very weird to us that feature flags were going to be completely disconnected from every other software delivery tool. For auditing compliance security purposes, we didn't like setting the same stuff up over and over in multiple tools, having to control production access in multiple tools for what is effectively still a software delivery tool. And then we found the tools were either really focused on engineering and did a good job, but then we ran into the same problems with non-technical users, or they were really focused on people like marketing or PMs, and they really weren't optimized for engineers to do more advanced things. So we weren't blown away by what we found in this evaluation. And that's when we kind of sat down and said, we're a software delivery company. Our problem here is we want this to be tied closer to software delivery. So maybe we can build a tool ourselves to do this. And that's what we did. We went out and we built Harness feature flags. And it was very exciting. It was very fun. And we're not really going to talk about that at all in this webinar. This is not necessarily about how we built Harness feature flags. So we'll flash forward from the decision where we decided to build it, and we'll say, now we have it, but we have to use it. It wasn't the case that once we built it, our problem was solved, because instead of having one feature flag tool now, we had two feature flag tools. That was suboptimal. So how do we migrate now all of our flags over to the new tool? How do we start using it? How do we deprecate the old tool? How do we get people and processes transferred over to use the new tool, right? We had dozens, maybe hundreds of people trained and ramped up on a certain way of doing things, and now that was changing under their feet. So we wanted to make sure we got to the new tool, got to it in an efficient way, but also kept the company working, kept the processes working, didn't cause a lot of chaos along the way. Now, the first question we asked that, is it even technically possible to migrate? Is this a start over situation? Is this a migrate situation? Is it worth migrating? So the first thing we had to do from a technical standpoint is figure out, is this feasible? And if so, how? And Rushabh, you led that effort. So I was hoping maybe you could start talking us through how you approach that problem.
Right. So I think it goes back to the crux of the problem. Like we have a new system in place, and now we want to start using it. But just being it's both an engineering problem, which is like analogous to changing any big underneath infrastructure piece. So if changing the entire feature flag system is like changing your database layer altogether, and you're going to face the same kind of problems. You don't want to have any downtime. The process has to be seamless. There should be no production impact. And we had a wide variety of audience who were going to be impacted, right? The first category of the audience is going to be the developers, right? Who are actually going to be creating feature flags and actually writing and shipping a lot of code. And their workflow has to not be impacted. The second category of users we had were the end users, right? The end users are the people who actually use feature flags. And this again encompassed like a wide variety of people, right? These included the product managers who actually would decide which features like turn on, turn off in production for certain customers. It could be the customer success organization who's actually managing different customers and making sure that we have certain features catered to their use cases. We had sales. We had SREs who would actually use certain feature flags for fine-tuning certain applications, and whole bunch of others that whom we were even not aware about. So we had to satisfy the second category of our users as well, which are the end users. And to elaborate the depth of the problem, and I think this would probably be relatable to many of you participating today, is feature flags were embedded in almost all our microservices at Harness, right? It could be the front end, the edge services, the backend services, which were being used for multiple purposes. And like I mentioned before, we couldn't afford downtime. It had to work perfectly, accurately, and the most important thing, migrating to a new system shouldn't have any impact on the performance of the system. So these were the main key milestones that we had to address as part of this migration journey.
So I was going to ask you about that. A lot of the things you said, they sound really, really good, but maybe we could talk some more about the in-depth, being one of the users of the system and the one that customers reach out to first when something is broken. How did we actually make sure that it doesn't break the flow, that nothing falls through the cracks as we go through things?
Right. So I'm going to break down this process, this migration journey, into three main parts. The first part is going to be talking about mainly the implementation, right? What did we do to make this happen? The second part is actually testing and verifying if actually the new system is working exactly as the old system. And then the third part is going to be about communication, and then I will go and deep dive into each one of them. So to answer your first question, Ilan, right, what we did was we identified all the microservices which were actually using feature flags, and it turned out to be a majority of them. And what we did was we introduced a new configuration in each of these microservices that would actually control which feature flag system it would use. So while we were actually implementing this entire migration journey, we wanted to make sure the existing system does not break, and things should just be working as is. So we introduced a configuration which would be which feature flag configuration to use, which would default to the homegrown solution. The high level idea of this migration was going to be that we wanted to do this rollout incrementally, make sure that we verify that the system is working in the each environment, starting with the pre-QA environment and the QA environment, and slowly as we gain confidence, start to get data, build the data, verify the data, communicate that we have the right data to the stakeholders to build confidence, and then roll it out to production. That way we could significantly reduce the risk of having a downtime, and making sure that everybody is in the loop, and that we are able to take everybody together as part of this journey as we continue this migration.
So do you want to maybe talk a little bit about how we migrated the actual flags between the old system and the new one? Because that was actually an interesting problem we had to solve.
Right. So the approach that we took was we wanted to actually migrate all the feature flags from our homegrown solution to the new solution. So there was no cutover, as if all the new feature flags would be in the new system, and we would just continue to use the old system for as long as those old feature flags existed. We wanted to just rip the band-aid off and actually just do it right the first time. And to do that, we actually introduced two concepts. The first is we introduced feature flag admin SDK as part of the migration effort, and we embedded this SDK into our code base. What this SDK allowed us to do is actually programmatically interact with the feature flag server and be able to create feature flags on the fly. The second thing that we did was we figured out a way to do the mapping from the old feature flag model to the new feature flag model. The old feature flag model was very simplistic in its approach. It was simply a Boolean flag, and we had a certain conditions of for which accounts or for which customers that feature flag would be enabled. And the new system was pretty descriptive in its data model. So all we had to do was figure out a way to do the mapping. So that was a bit of the coding part or the implementation part, which was, I would say, a medium level effort. The next thing that we did was use this admin SDK and this data model that we built up to kind of create like a migration service that we would run at the startup of all these microservices, and make sure that all the data from the old homegrown solution is imported and actually populated to the new tool. The goal was to make sure that the data is exactly the same in the new tool as the old tool. And the other thing we did was we intercepted all the places where feature flags were being changed. So we would intercept, it depends on everybody's architecture, but traditionally there is going to be a service which is going to be responsible for making changes to the feature flag. So we would just intercept the methods for these changes, and we would make sure that all the changes are also propagated to the new system. That way, the old system and the new system would always be in sync. So any changes would sync up to the new system. And that way we made sure that all the feature flags are migrated and they're consistent in the new system, right? So that was one of the first goals that we wanted to leverage.
So this is kind of cool. So this is all part of the harness feature flag, but how did you make sure that the new behavior using the new tool is exactly the same as it was with the old one?
Right. So again, there was additional one more configuration that we added to the microservice, and that was what we call the audit mode. So while this migration effort was going on, we actually used to turn on the audit mode for a given environment. We start with the most non-risky environment, which is like the QA or the pre-QA environment, where we would turn on this audit mode. And what this audit mode would do is actually run the new feature flag service and the old feature flag service side by side. And still the old feature flag service was in effect. The new feature flag service would just get the output, what it would finally evaluate to, and we would log any discrepancies if there were differences in what both the systems were reporting. And what this allowed us to do is to verify that the new system and the old system were consistent in their behavior. If there was any mismatch, then we would know about it. And what we would do is we would basically log these discrepancies, and we created certain dashboards using the standard logging tools to basically generate data for us to kind of present to our stakeholders, and that would give us the confidence that the new system was working exactly analogous to the old system.
So did we use that to test what, by the time we get to prod, that it's fully baked and all the features are there?
Right. So that goes now we are done with, we are at the verification stage, and now we are at the final stage where we looked at the data looks great, and we are now ready to start to use the new system. So I'm gonna, on a very high level, describe how it happened, right? So we basically rolled out this audit mode in the pre-QA environment. We checked that there were no discrepancies. At this time, we are ready to switch the pre-QA environment to start using the new system. So we would change the feature flag mode in the pre-QA environment to the harness feature flags. We would disable the audit mode, disable the sync mechanism, because now the master copy is going to be your new feature flag solution. You don't want to rely on the old mechanism. And now you basically communicate this to your stakeholders. So in the pre-QA environment, that audience was going to be our QA, and the developers who are actually closely using it. And we would again collect the data. This time it would be the logs, the alerts, anything that would identify if there was some extra performance overload on our microservices which were starting to use this new system. And again, we would be very transparent about communication. We created the right dashboards and the right information that would be presented to all the stakeholders who were involved. And once we had collected enough data, that would give us the confidence to kind of move to the next environment. And then we would reiterate the same process. So we did the same process for pre-QA. Then we went to the QA environment. Once we got the sign-off from QA that they are comfortable using the new system, that's when we actually started to work with the SREs and customer success engineers, and we started to upgrade the UAT environment, or the user acceptance testing environment. And then finally, at one fine day on a weekend, we decided to do the cutover, and that's how we rolled it out to production.
And I just want to jump in real quick and point out that right now what we've been talking about was a bunch of really intensive, sophisticated engineering stuff that Rushabh led us through so we could do all these technical migrations, and at the end of the day have a system that is working, continuing to work, not disrupting things. We have all the flags we used to. So this really lowered the impact of doing the migration company-wide because Rushabh found all of these answers for us. But not everything in the problem was technical when we talk about the migration, right? We've mentioned a couple times that we have other non-technical folks using the tool. We have sales engineers, support people, PMs, account management teams. It's not only a technical challenge. It's not only about the developers who create and use the flags when thinking about migrations. So Ilan, I'm wondering if you can, you run the support team, which is still pretty technical at a company like Harness, but really not developers. Y'all aren't creating or managing the flags. So kind of from your team's perspective, I'm curious if you can talk what the migration was like, given that you were not necessarily in charge of it in the way Rushabh was from a technical standpoint.
First, kudos to Rushabh. They've built a really impressive tool set that allows us to check and double check and verify the behavior as we were moving forward. So nothing fell through the cracks. So me and my team had the confidence that things are not going to break, which, sounds like a small thing, but really that's what it's all about for us. But, as an advice to everybody listening, if you're planning similar migration, really the first thing you need to do is map out who are the people that use and consume those feature flags. I mean, developers is the easy answer, but who are the rest of them? We were actually very surprised by how big of a population it is that uses or need to change feature flags at Harness. It's sales engineers, it's product manager, it's support, it's DevOps. It depends on the environment that they control. There's a lot of different people that need to touch and understand it. So mapping out that population was our first step, and we were doing that while the product was being developed and being implemented. And then, of course, it followed up by training to make sure that all of these people know how to use the new tool. A lot of them, they're used to the old way of doing things. New tool needs to come in. It was really nice to see how easy and simple it was to train them because the tool is so user-friendly. So it didn't really impact people too much. They were very receptive to it and were very willing and able to learn the new tool. So that was nice. Lately, the cutoff date came over. It was all about communication, right? Let people know that it's coming. Let people know it just happened, and be there for them once the migration is over. So if they have questions, if there are problems, it was myself, Ethan, you also was there with us in the trenches, and of course Rushabh, and we were all working together to iron out any problems that happened after migration. And last but not least, we have to take all of that and bake it into our onboarding process. So the next people that being hired, join the organization, would have access to the tool on day one, will know how to use the tool on day one, and we don't have any breakage in internal process, keeping our customers happy, satisfied, and everything we want it to be.
Awesome.
Back
so
to
then,
you.
That's good to hear that we managed to not break things. Sounds like the core of the proposition there.
That's always good to not break things. Try breaking things, try not breaking things. Not breaking things is better.
And then where did that leave us, Rushabh, at the end of this process? Can you maybe walk us through completing the migration? Sort of how did the system work for us at this point? How were you working as an engineer? Kind of what did our process look like when we got to the other side?
Right. So, like I mentioned before, one of the things developers really loved about our old solution was it was pretty simple to add a new feature flag. Uh, they didn't have to jump through hoops and go to any UI to like provision a new feature flag, and they really looked forward to kind of having that same experience. Uh, if we want to adopt feature flags successfully in any organization, we have to ensure that the developers are having a good experience. Otherwise, they will not use feature flags, and then it'll be very hard to kind of incorporate that into the development cycle. So to basically keep the same user experience, the developer experience, we ensured that we leverage the admin SDK, which we had integrated into our microservices as part of the migration to kind of retain the same developer experience. So as a developer, if I wanted to add a new feature flag, all I had to do was still continue to just add the same enum in that particular class, which would basically have the list of feature flags. And as soon as that code gets merged into the master branch and it is upgraded to QA environment, so it is ready to kind of be into the release cycle, the sync logic would you automatically propagate that new feature flag to our feature flag server. That way the flag is ready to kind of be used by all the developers in our pre-prod and prod environment. And developers don't have to worry about making sure if the feature flag has already been provisioned in our feature flag server. So it just works seamlessly out of the box. That way everybody is happy, developers are happy, and of course Ilan's team is happy, and product managers, everybody is happy. That's one of the things that we wanted to ensure, and it's working great so far.
So then a question we get after all of this success that you're likely to get, that you may be the one asking anytime you go through an initiative like this, is you pulled it off, it's great, you got the migration done, the new system's working great, you didn't blow anything up, everything's working. Now where's the ROI? What did you actually get out of it? Why was this worth it at the end of the day? So what we want to kind of do here is talk through some things we're doing now that we've migrated that we never could have done with our old internal solution. Probably things we could have done if we really wanted to invest lots of engineering time and resources and ops time in expanding the old system. But again, that was not a good investment. It's not a good investment for most companies. It's why turnkey solutions exist for this kind of thing. So starting off some stuff we're doing now that has made things kind of way better night and day than they were using the old internal solution. You can talk about auditing. We mentioned this earlier. It's a big problem we had before. On the PM side, I know this is very helpful for me because I can quickly go look at any flag or any target in the system and say, what's happened with this flag or target? Who has it been turned on for? Who has it been turned off for? But I think, Ilan, probably for your team, this was even more useful than it was for me. So maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, no, I think one of the greatest feature we got out of it is the who did what and when ability that is really good. It's integrated to all of our other tools, so people are provisioned automatically. It's something that we can see immediately when we go in, who turned on the feature flag on, we turned it off, for what account. It's very handy when somebody does something. We actually had a customer the other day saying, hey, this behavior changed. Go in, find out that somebody turned on a feature flag for them, find out who is in the customer account, ask that feature flag be turned on, and there we go. We could close the loop within the customer, keep him happy. It also helped us internally. We have SOC 2 audits, and they want to know who did what, when, how. This gives us a full audit log for everything that ever got changed and keeps the auditor happy. I think on top of it, Ethan, this also helps you as a product manager, not just per feature flag to see what happens, but to see a big picture as well, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, right? And this is something we talk a lot about, which is feature flags do so many things for so many different people that it's easy to focus on one or the other. But to Ilan's point, right, one of the things we can do now is we have these analytics on how our feature flags are being consumed. Is the true state being shown into whom? How often? How many evaluations, which you can think of as impressions, is a flag getting in different states? What this is really huge for me as a PM is I'm trying to see what's going on in a beta. Are the flags being used? For engineering, we want to know, is the feature actually being stress tested in the cohort we've turned it on for? So these kind of analytics let us actually see what's happening in the wild with the feature flag. Making sure it's actually getting the data, the impressions, whatever our metric is for wanting to roll it out further or see the usage. We've got that data right here in a dashboard that we can query, we can hit against APIs, we can build into our processes. So it's this whole world of visibility we didn't have before. On top of the visibility, right, I'm a PM, I'm semi-technical. I'm not technical in the way Rushabh is technical. But that's okay because I still have to use feature flags every day. People on our sales teams do. So one of the things we invested in along the lines of visibility, making it more powerful and ease of use, is making sure we had a UI that could be navigated by anyone who needs to get in here. Sometimes you just want to go see if it's being used. You don't necessarily need to know how it's implemented. So this easier for non-technical people. Ilan, I think that's probably another thing we focused on for your team in particular.
Yeah, it was very exciting. You know, as I mentioned before, the homegrown tools are usually created by developers for developers. They think like developers, which is great, but that doesn't always translate to customer success people or sales engineers or salespeople that also need to be able to see what's being done and make changes as they happen. The tool now is much easier. I mean, everybody could look, is it on or off? It's very easy, right? It's either blue, turned on, not blue, turned off. What's the discussion? What's kind of the details that you have around it? When was it done? Having all that information and making it easy to use is really a major selling point for us within the organization. Because people look at it, they say, I get it, no problem, I will use it. And that makes the tool better to use internally. Absolutely.
One of the outcomes of that is you make it easier for non-technical people to use. You have more people in your organization using it, which is a great thing. Sometimes security folks or engineering folks, they'll want to make sure that that's safe now that you have a lot more, maybe less technical people in the system. You want to make sure nothing goes wrong there, that nobody accidentally turns on something that shouldn't. So Rushabh, how do you kind of think about how we use the system now for making sure everything is still safe in production with all of us non-technical PMs in there?
So I think you guys are great. I think you guys are very responsible. But yes, there can be one of those times where somebody's turning on or turning off a feature like late at night and kind of change the wrong environment, and oops, we have an outage, right? So that's the kind of the issues that we would like to prevent as engineers, because we wouldn't like to be paged late at night for some issues that is caused by some random error. What this allows us to do, the new system allows us to do, is put the right guardrails around enabling feature flags, and having the right process and having the right visibility around who's done it, when it was done, and if there was an approval process required, if there's anything which is required as part of your delivery mechanism or standard engineering processes. You could easily incorporate that rather than just creating documents for everybody to follow as the best practices, because that usually never gets followed, right? So and this goes to a larger question, is or a larger point, that basically now feature flags are not distinct as a separate entity. They are in fact a part of your software delivery lifecycle, and we can actually incorporate feature flags as one of the parts, an important part of your software delivery lifecycle.
Yep, I think this is a really big one. If I think of it as a PM, right, I might want to make sure feature flags get connected to Jira so I can see the updates there and I know what's going on in the work delivery process. Or maybe we want feature flags connected to our Microsoft Teams or our Slack so we can get notifications out to everyone. Making sure they're not disconnected, that they're part of how we work, was a big thing for us. And I think, Ilan, it probably had some impact for you as well.
Yeah, definitely. Using the harness, pipeline platform really allowed us to take the feature flags to the next level from a manual process that people go and do because they got a ticket that somebody told them to do something. It can now become part of the pipeline of how we deploy our software, make changes. So somebody can make a request to turn a feature flag on. It sends notification. It captures that approval in a Jira. Somebody has to go approve that feature flag would turn on either percentage or for everyone, and having all of that as a pipeline, allowing us to have multiple people touch it automatically is really great. It allows us to audit things better, get approvals better, and actually create separation of duties between the people that need to approve it and the people that actually do the work, making it harder to use.
So then
Did I
one
say
other
harder
thing,
to use or easier to use? Wait, I
you
said
said
making it
harder.
harder to use. I meant making it easier to use. I'm sorry.
You did not
You
make
should
it
pay
harder to
attention to
use.
what I say.
So way back at the start of this conversation here, Rushabh, I want to circle back on this. You jumped in pretty eagerly and you said you loved the old tool, that it was really simple to use, which begs the question: if we loved the old tool so much, um, what is it like for you now? You had to stop using the tool you loved. Can you talk a little bit about how we made sure you're still happy that you still love the new tool?
Right. So one of the main things that we want to make sure is developers are happy, because they are going to be making new feature flags. And if you want to kind of, again, I have elaborated this point, but if you want to incorporate feature flags into your organization, you got to make developers happy. So we ensured that their old mechanism of creating new feature flags is not impacted. So that would not kind of slow them down from making new feature flags. But also this new tool gives us some additional capabilities. The one of them is, which I really like, is the capability to use config as code, and the ability to kind of create feature flags using GitOps. So you can just have a declarative way of defining new feature flags and actually incorporate that with your other developer tools and your other workflows to create feature flags on the fly and actually manage their life cycle. The admin SDK is obviously complementary to what I just mentioned of how you can programmatically create and manage the feature flags. That's a great way to kind of interact and create feature flags programmatically right inside your code. And the most important thing, which I think, which is actually a problem with using feature flags in general, is you are going to eventually have a lot of feature flags, and there are two kinds of feature flags. The majority of them is going to be, your feature flags are something that you would like to guard your new feature with, and eventually you would like to kind of get rid of it because they're not going to be used anymore. So you will reach a state where you're going to have a lot of stale feature flags. Now, how do you identify stale feature flags? How do you know which feature flags are actually being used and which are ripe for getting deprecated? This new tool gives us clear visibility into which feature flags are actually being used, and and which are like way past their normal life cycle, and who are ripe for getting deprecated. So that's the clean visibility that it gives us, and actually helps us to keep our code clean as we are starting to kind of move fast and incorporate this into our lifestyle. So these are the main three things as a developer, I find is going to be really a game changer for us as we adopt it at company-wide at Harness.
And so I think what you hear there is we managed to thread the needle of keeping Rushabh and our developers happy while also bringing on folks like me and Ilan's team into a much better experience. And so I think that's what we were ultimately aiming for. And having now, I would say, I think we've probably talked enough, and we appreciate you listening in on us. One thing I want to say real quick, and then we'll get to your questions. We didn't talk too much about what our product actually does necessarily or how you might use it. That wasn't really the point of the conversation. We do have an ebook. You can go download it if that's interesting to you. You can scan this QR code or just Google it, go to harness.io. This will walk you through how to use feature flags, how to get started quickly, the basics of what our product does. So we'd love for you to check it out if you're interested. It is very good. And now I think we have a little bit of time left where we can take some questions on how our migration went. The first one I'll ask here, and if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Technically, what surprised you or went wrong? I guess that's a great question. I guess that's one for you, Rushabh.
I think the thing that actually surprised me was not a technical, but more of non-technical is how many people are actually using feature flags. And I really just thought Ilan was the only one using it, but once I actually started to make changes, and we realized how many people actually were noticing it, and they were interested in making sure that their work is not impacted.
Yeah. I think that was my biggest surprise. I didn't realize how many people within the organization care. I thought, yeah, it's like the two of us and nobody else. And all of a sudden we found out all these people that care and want to be involved and want to have access and understand it. So that was really great. I think the other thing that I was really surprised by, and maybe as somebody who doesn't write code regularly, is how many types of feature flags are there? The different behaviors that they have and control. That really was a bit of a shock to me because I didn't realize how heavily it is embedded to every pieces of our code and how many types of feature flags we have.
Yeah, we actually have a question along those lines. I think it's a great point. Given how many things flags were doing in the system, probably one for you, Rushabh, again. Were there any flags that we could not migrate for some reason? Anything that was being used in a way that did not carry over?
Not actually. And the reason is the homegrown solution had a very simplistic data model, and the harness feature flags is a very rich data model. So we have a very descriptive way to kind of incorporate whichever feature flags you may have, right? So if you are having a simple homegrown solution, most likely it's going to be a boolean flag, right? So you just want to turn on, turn off certain functionality, right? And you might have a few exceptions along the way. Now this can easily be translated into the language for a very powerful tool like harness feature flags. You can actually just translate it into the corresponding format for harness feature flags, and that's it, and you have the migration path ready. And we were able to migrate all the feature flags because they were pretty simple. Along the way, they were just boolean flags. So to answer your question, there was no flags that we were not able to migrate. We were able to migrate everything, so we didn't lose any data.
Okay, awesome. I'll take a shot at answering this one first, and then I'll see what y'all think. Question is, was anything in particular worse after the migration than before? I think pretty unequivocally the answer to that is no. Although I would say there might have been moments in the middle of the migration where we maybe could have communicated a little better or done a training workshop a few days earlier, where we might have temporarily degraded people's experience because they weren't quite sure which system to use for a few days. That's a process thing. That's a good learning experience to make sure you communicate to all the stakeholders proactively enough. So I think after the migration, we were great. In between, I think it went remarkably smooth for the size of the cutover, but there were definitely parts where, in hindsight, I could have sent out a calendar invite for a few days earlier than I did and keep people informed.
I think I could second that. There's definitely a big improvement, and I can't think of anything now that I want to say, oh, let's go back to the old tool because something is missing or there's not there. I admit we did learn from the migration process itself that more communication is better. We thought we were over communicating, and we found out later that no, we were not. We could have communicated more, nobody would have been mad at us. So that is definitely a lesson. And it's funny, I've been doing this for never mind how many years. You can see my beard is a little white. So I've definitely been doing this for a while, and I never learned this. I always think I over communicate, and I always learn in hindsight that I could have communicated even more.
And we've got one more question I see in here. How did we go about training people to use the new system? Maybe you can take that, Ilan.
Yeah, I think what was really nice, because the migration process went through the different environments that we have, dev, QA, staging, prod. I was able to use the non-production environment to train people before we did the production cutover. the majority of the non-technical people who use the feature flags care about production. They don't care about other environments, with very few exceptions. So having those environments in place and actually be able to go in and say, look, this is what the experience is. Let's all try it. Was really, really easy and made it really something that people can understand very quickly. I mean, my average training time on the feature flag product was between 15 minutes and 30 minutes, depends on the team I was working with and how complex their use case was. But it really was that easy. It's just go in, show it to them. They got it. They got it immediately. It's just that straightforward.
Awesome. All right, well, I think that is all the questions we have in chat. We would love for y'all to get in touch with us if you think of anything after the webinar, or if you're watching this in the future, not in real time, and you want to get in touch, we'd love to answer your questions. You can see all of our contact info here, and I think I will hand it back to Cody.
Outstanding. Well, I'd like to thank our panel for taking the time to be with us today. And if there were any questions that we were unable to get to today, we will send those over to Harness, and they'll get those answered for you after the webinar concludes. A quick reminder that today's session was recorded. Following the webinar, you'll receive an email with a link to access the recording on demand. You can also find the recording living on the DevOps website, so just visit devops.com/webinars and look in the on-demand section. It will be waiting for you. Now on to the 4 winners of our $25 gift card drawing. Our first winner is Josh D. Our second winner is Samit E. Our third winner is Christopher M. And our fourth winner is Maxim M. So congratulations to the 4 of you. Please keep an eye on your inbox to make sure you claim your gift card. And if you don't receive an email, just check your spam folder. Ethan, Rushabh, and Ilan, again, thank you so much for taking the time to put together this presentation. And I'd also like to thank you, our audience, for being with us for the entirety of today's program. This is Cody J. Brown signing off. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.